Attention listeners, ahead are spoilers.
Hello and greetings. You find yourself within the movie trap. I am Russell Carlson, and with me as always, Chris Boroff.
I haven't been knocked out yet. That's pretty good.
And also join me, Zach Powers.
I relinquish my duties as Keymaster.
On the movie trap, one of the three people you just met picks a theme, and each of the three hosts picks a movie based on that theme. Each host starts with 10 points to vote with whichever movie wins the theme at the end of the voting round. Plus, we have some bonus points, but not many in this round anymore. Once we've watched all three movies, we will then use the points that we have gained and vote on which one is our favorite, and whoever wins picks the next theme. Previously on the movie trap, we began the theme of ubiquitous movies or movies that everybody have seen, but you, the host, have not. It was my pick with Good Will Hunting. And that left us with Chris Boroff. You have 12 points to go and one more point to allocate. I have 11 points to vote with one more point to allocate. And Zach Powers, you have 12 points with 2 points to allocate. So that brings us to our movie at hand, which is Zach's pick, the 1989 John Cusack romantic classic, Say Anything.
Say Anything, as mentioned, is a 1989 movie. It's directed by Cameron Crowe in his directorial debut. It stars John Cusack and Ione Skye as a pair of sort of love-stricken high schoolers. Also stars Frasier's own John Mahoney as Ione Skye's father, who may or may not be in a bit of legal trouble. The long and short of this particular movie is that Ione Skye is an extremely accomplished high school student, the valedictorian of her class, who also receives one of the most prestigious grants and scholarships in the nation early in the movie, while John Cusack as Lloyd Dobler is kind of an underachiever, sort of a nothing entity at the high school in a manner of speaking, who nevertheless is very infatuated with her, and decides to pursue a romantic relationship with her, starting with simply, giving her a call one day. She agrees to go out to a party with him after an unseen meal at the mall prior to graduation. And over the course of the summer, at the end of which she is destined to head to London with this amazing scholarship that she got, they gradually fall deeper and deeper in love. He is, all things considered, a pretty sweet guy who lives with his sister and her young son. His parents seem to be more or less not around. And she obviously has an extremely close relationship with her father. Her mother is also out of the picture. She works most days at her father's business, which is a retirement home. And as things go on, she becomes more infatuated with him, but her father is not as impressed because he has no specific plans for his future. He's sort of aimless and interested in kickboxing, more or less. It's also revealed that her father may have some troubles with the IRS. They're coming to family meals and the like. And as time goes on, eventually her father convinces her that Lloyd is kind of no good for her in spite of her own internal feelings. The two of them, Lloyd and Ione Skye, who plays Diane, have sex to Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes. But shortly thereafter, at her father's bidding, she breaks up with him. Lloyd sort of continues to call her and sort of varyingly either get finality on the situation or get back together. Sometimes at the behest of his two female friends. One of his friends, played by Lily Taylor, he goes through a journey where he's like, well, maybe hanging out with too many women, meets up with the guys. The guys are, I don't know, dumb and kind of sexist. Meanwhile, the problems with Diane's father become more and more obvious. It becomes clear that he has possibly been stealing away some of his elder clients' money and keeping it for himself after they die. Eventually, she discovers said money in an ornate box they keep at their home.
I mean, I don't
She
know
breaks
where.
open with a penknife.
I mean, I don't know where you keep your ill-gotten goods, but I usually keep them in the loudest, most obvious spot to hide evidence, to present it to anyone who might find it. Yeah.
Right next to the window.
Her father tries to, sort of defend himself by saying he has done more for these people than their own families in many regards. But nevertheless, he is taken in and eventually sent to prison for embezzling from his elderly clients. And after that occurs, she, distraught, reconciles with Lloyd and sort of lives with him for the remainder of that summer. Near the end of the film, Lloyd visits her father in prison. He is somewhat bitter about the situation, but nevertheless gives him a letter from his daughter, and saying that she has difficulty forgiving him at this point, but she shows up in person and gives him one last hug, and gives him a pen to write to her in Britain, a pen previously established in the movie that was a gift, from I believe from Lloyd. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, it's from one of the famous lines of the movie. I gave her my heart, she gave me a pen.
Yeah, it's like the dad gave her a pen to then hand the boyfriend during the breakup. It was a very odd choice. There are a number of odd choices from John Mahoney's character.
Right. So ultimately, Lloyd, despite the two of them not being sure what their future would be together, with her leaving for another continent, decides to accompany her from Britain to Britain. And in the final scene of the film, is consoling her as the plane takes off because she has a deep fear of flying. And as the plane takes off, the movie ends. Pretty short summary, but I find this movie a little shambolic at points. So, it's more about, I think it's more useful to go into individual scenes in the conversation than to go too deep dive in the summary, because a lot of the scenes
I get that. I totally get that, especially because, when you consider, the time and place this movie was released in, and the fact that James L. Brooks kind of had his hand in it, because he likes those kind of trifurcated conflicts. Think of broadcast news. I know Boris loves to bring that movie up with William Hurt, Holly Hunter, and Albert Brooks. None of the three characters, they're all in direct conflict with each other most of the time. But none of the three characters are necessarily unsympathetic, and you sort of understand where they're coming from. And I think they do the same thing with this one too, because John Mahoney, it's not like John Mahoney's
he's not a monster. He's not a villain.
Yeah.
He's very sweet with his daughter for the majority of the film.
He's very protective of his daughter, but that's also because he's very protective of his own feelings of guilt and shame, and it's sort of a projection onto that. And there's a relatability to all the.
Well, it's also how they handle the character.
I do want to discuss. Yeah. Before we go too deep, I do want to discuss how I came to choose this particular film. There were a few on my queue, some of which I wanted to watch more than this movie. I think I would enjoy more than this movie, and I probably still believe that, but I just didn't think they were... I don't know. You were talking about ubiquitous things, right?
Yeah.
Things that are common across pop culture, and I think that image of Lloyd holding the boombox playing In Your Eyes in the trench coat is very, 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 one of the most well-known images from at least the 80s in film, if not,
well beyond.
For me, it feels like it's like the earliest form of a meme that I can remember, because it was like people would just have that in the movie. Like they wouldn't have anything but someone holding a boombox to bring up that as a reference, and everybody knew what they were talking about at the time.
I considered others like, again, movies, some of which I think I might enjoy more than this movie, some of which I still want to watch. A League of Their Own, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Haven't seen those. I think there's some degree of like cultural, like, recognition of those movies. But I just thought that ultimately that image alone was like, like Russell's Good Will Hunting pick has a few scenes. This has a couple scenes. Like this felt like the ubiquitous answer.
Yeah, and I concur, because like, let's talk about the shot. Because I think that, like, first of all, it was shot in two different time and places. It wasn't even the song that was playing when they shot it. Yeah, it was John Cusack didn't really care for it.
Yeah, it was Boning in the Boneyard by Fishbone was what was actually playing on the boombox, because they knew they were going to dub something else in.
Yeah, right. Well, because he had actually commissioned another song and just didn't like it because it pretty much described the plot, at least according to the IMDb page. So I just think it's funny that it's so iconic, but yet it's such a haphazard, more or less sort of camera trick and a post-production trick, and yet that's what culminates, and that's what everybody thinks of it. But Bor, if you were talking about how that scene plays in relation to the movie, I was sort of struck that it's the emotional apex of the movie for Lloyd, at least, and for her a little bit. I was still struck in the romantic
story, because I almost think that the father storyline, and in many ways I think you could make the argument that Diane is the main character of this film.
Correct.
Is just as important, and in fact the title comes exclusively from the storyline between Diane and her father. Yeah. It's repeated twice, and both times it's spoken between those two characters.
I mean, the weird thing to consider in this is that how the characters function. John Cusack essentially is the manic pixie dream girl of the script. He comes into her life, causes a bunch of trouble. He's like, he has all the markers that you'd normally attribute to a manic pixie dream girl, but you don't think of it that way because he's a guy, and you assume he's the main character because, of course, he's the guy who gets the girl,
and
so why wouldn't he be the main character?
He's eventually on all the posters because of that famous scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and he's sort of like her redemption almost, like that's his sort of device for her. He's that she's going to get out of the shadow of her father or whatever, and he's a device for that. And the romance angle is what everybody remembers in this movie. I mean, that's why this is a classic date movie for high school kids. This is where you bring your date to show them this movie, to show them that you too are like a sensitive schmuck like John Cusack is.
There's some problems with how it's handled, though. It's a bad example for young people, I think.
Okay, well, I mean, it is the 80s.
Well, it is. But
I'm gonna give two sides to this coin. But let's say go ahead, Chris.
The thing is it feels as though the film kind of goes a great distance to, like, if I guess it plays differently because you know that she likes him too, but a lot of the things with how he approaches her after he gets dumped comes across to me now like really aggressive, like calling her house a lot. Shows up outside unannounced, playing a boombox. Like, that's like toxic masculinity stuff. And a lot of people, just to be real, like, if you have people who aren't emotionally that intelligent who see this and think this is how romance is supposed to happen, they think this is how you're supposed to approach people. And it's not. Yep. Like, not at all.
I could hear that. I could hear that. But I also think that, like, given that it is the core of his whole character is dating Diane. I mean, it's his first line in the movie.
I mean, that's like, codependent and weird. That's codependent and weird.
But he's also a high school kid. He's also a fucking high school kid who doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground.
Yeah. I'm going to take a slightly oppositional approach here. Lloyd, among 80s and even 90s romantic comedy male protagonist, Lloyd Dobler ages among the best, in my opinion. Like,
I completely agree.
There ain't no stealing panties. There ain't no, like, that's de rigueur shit. Like, there is some degree of him, like, after they break up and they've had sex and she has said, I love you, like he's taking the breakup hard. Prior to them getting together, he calls and does a few things, but like, I don't think it's that intense. And in fact, there's even a scene where like he's mostly friends with women, and when he meets with the guys, they're so much worse and shittier. Like, I think that Lloyd Dobler, for a romantic male protagonist of this era, holds up just about as well as anybody I can think of. He holds up better than fucking Ferris Bueller. Holds up better than fucking Judd Nelson in The Breakfast Club. I mean, yeah, I think that for this time, he's kind of a paragon of like one of the better ones.
Even think of the movie that Cameron Crowe wrote immediately before this with Fast Times. That's way more like horny teenager shit, you know, like that's way more Animal House stuff, you know, and even though, you know, Judd Reinhold is still kind of a lovable dope, he's still like this kind of creepy weirdo who likes to look at his sister's friends outside in the bathroom, you know.
My girlfriend watched this with me, and while she was watching it, she was like, she didn't think that Lloyd went too far. She felt like, yes, there were those calls after they broke up and all that stuff, but eventually she was like, this just feels like teenagers having big emotions and doesn't really go beyond that. Like, it never goes too insane in that regard. And I think almost every movie of this era, and in fact, the next 10 to 15 years does.
And I think that that's fair too. And I think what Borf's point about his characteristics being like the kind of male version of the manic pixie dream girl, I get that. I hear that 100%.
I think that's fair. I think it's a great point.
Because
in fact, I think it's such a good point. I'm going to give Chris a point because I think it's extremely accurate.
Well, good, because I only have one, because I was going to give you a point because out of 80s sort of toxic Romeos, well, you could do worse than Lloyd Dobler. Maybe with taste in music.
And I do agree, because it was very novel. Like, there are a couple things in this with that were way more subtle and nuanced than other relationships in these type of movies. Like, for instance, the fact that the girl went through giving what I think is probably one of the worst explanations possible, with the worst order of information handed out at a time, to her father about how she lost her virginity. Like, way too much over-explaining there. But the fact that at the end of it, she was the one who was actually the active participant. Like, it wasn't Lloyd talking her into it or cajoling her into it. She decided, after deciding for herself she was going to wait, she decided she wanted to do it. So it was nice to see that was a change. It wasn't something where the guy was getting the girl. It was where the girl attacked the guy. But there's another weird thing with this. In the movie, like, other than the main relationship, most of the teen relationships that are shown are all shown to kind of be like foils to the main relationship, because every time somebody else shows up, they're always having an argument or crying, and it seems silly, but essentially their problems and the problems of the main characters are probably a lot more lined up. So it's just a question of perspective as to like why we should think that Lloyd Dobler's issue at the party is more important than, for instance, the girl who interrupts his conversation with, I guess, a guidance counselor that came to a teen party to talk to kids about shit. Yeah, that was a weird
moment.
That was weird. But like, in the middle of that weird conversation, there's like a couple that goes through, and the girl's like, "Don't even talk to me, don't even talk to me," and they handle it as a joke and a gag. But their problem seems just as valid as the problem of the main protagonist to the main character. So I don't quite get why the judgment was there.
I actually thought that the relationship between Lily Collins and Jim was going to be Joe was going to be a much bigger part of this film, but it kind of just stops.
Sure.
After the party
that happens a couple of times in this movie. There are several setups to subplots, like even with his sister, and like she's dealing with like a divorce or whatever, and it does.
She's got a young child.
Yeah. Right, and there's several, but get little to no resolution. You know, like there's a lot of setups. I mean, even Diane meeting her mom, like out of nowhere, sort of sets up this, I don't think really necessary conflict point in her life, because like they go into this exposition that she chose to live with her father during the divorce or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was fine, but it just didn't really add anything, and I don't really know why they included so much. I mean, I get the reason why. I sort of understand why, with the exception of Lloyd and Diane, every other relationship around them is in shambles. Almost everybody. The dad's relationship with his wife, Lloyd's sister. It's everybody. So
initially, the relationship between the dad and Diane seems very stable, but
it gets accurate to high school relationships. You get tunnel vision. Like their problems aren't any more valid. It's your world and your problems. And that's how everybody pretty much treats their relationships in this movie, at least.
Yeah. Watching the stakes in this from that exact standpoint was very interesting for me, because it brought me back to a time where I'm like, oh yeah, when dating somebody was the most important problem in my life, which has not been a case for a very long time since I'm very married. But I mean, we have like things like nuclear holocaust to worry about now. Not so much, will you get a date with the girl from chemistry? Yeah,
and I think that an important thing is, it's tough. Like I think about, let's, for the sake of random comparison, let's think about like another teen movie. In Can't Hardly Wait, for example. This guy's trying to find the love of a woman he basically does not personally know at all. And his grand romantic gestures are all aimed at a woman that he has no significant relationship to. In this movie, once he does the grand romantic shit, it's somebody who has said, I love you. They broke it off like very suddenly and without him understanding why. They lost their virginity to each other. It's in the short time span. I think that is there. I've heard the phrase that there is a fine line between creepy and surprising in the romantic sense. And this does a much better job straddling that line than most teen comedies, romantic comedies, I think.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And like I think you said earlier, it's not that Lloyd's reaction to being broken up is necessarily out of character for an 18-year-old kid who, again, it's the most important thing in your life. You are going to react pretty dumb. And that's, I didn't feel it took away from the movie. In fact, that's why probably you call it a date movie. That's why it's the thing about, I thought, Borf, that you would hate this because of the fucking melodrama, the whole, I guess this is growing up sort of classic melodrama.
That stuff, that's like getting angry at a musical when the music starts. Because it's like, this is going to be it's going to be a teen movie. Like, there's stuff going to happen like that. Like, I will say this one was super nuanced in areas, like I said, specifically with the father, because he wasn't just a villain. He was like an empathetic character.
True.
He really loved his daughter. And even in situations where he had to interact with John Cusack's character, which Lou Dobbs, no, not Lou Dobbs.
Lloyd Dobler.
Lloyd Dobler. Lou Dobbs, different person. Lloyd Dobler.
Lou Dobbs, a very different person.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting mash 'em up. But they didn't have.
Oh my God! No, Borf, don't do it! Don't do it to my head.
But they didn't have.
He's holding up a boombox of a Trump speech or some bullshit.
Well, it's just that they didn't have like villain speeches. It's like you could tell there was a little bit of static, but not an unbelievable amount of static. Like, he didn't throw the kid out of the dinner. He didn't go, oh, that guy's a ne'er-do-well the first time he saw him. It was like, well, seems like he's happy enough. And yeah,
I think that I'll say two things. One of the brilliant I think choices in terms of mitigating the grossness that pervades some of these movies that they did was making Lloyd's friends exclusively women who were like sort of advising, like, and actually contrasting them with like guys of the same age. I think that was probably a pretty smart choice on the filmmaker's part to make this character seem a little more, a little stronger, a little more empathetic. He's also super good with kids, which doesn't hurt. But also, the father
also
is
wants
actually
to be a kickboxer.
Yeah, and the father, additionally, despite how it ends up, is so willing to let this daughter live her own life at the beginning. Like, there is a scene where he picks her up at 8:00 and he's like, I'll have your daughter back in 7 or 8 hours. And the father does not blink. He's like, all right. And at the party, she calls at like 2 a.m., drunk people in the background.
See you at dawn.
And the dad's like, okay, that's fine. And then the only time he gets upset is when she comes home at dawn, but she didn't call. Like, he's pretty forgiving for a dad of a valedictorian 18-year-old.
Yeah, that is an odd contrast, because it's like he's extremely accepting and open, but at the same time he's super controlling. Like, yeah, there's some weirdness with that, because there's scenes in the movie that, like, when I was watching them, they broke down to me as like classic like narcissistic tendencies. Like, there's a scene where he starts blaming himself. He starts playing the victim in front of her. It's like, I don't know, is it me? Did I do something wrong? I should let you be your own person. And it really was like, I think that scene ends okay, but when he starts going into it, I'm like, oh, this is bad. But then at the end, it's like, oh, just do your own thing. I love you, do your own thing. But for like a half second, I'm like, is this movie going to go full Cruella DeVille with this guy? Like, it's getting real Hannibal up in this bitch. What's happening with this movie?
I actually, that's one of the, one of the...
I'll probably cut that line out, sorry.
One of the things I didn't love about this movie is one of those scenes that you're talking about where it seems like the character is asking a question, is kind of going through this soliloquy with another person right next to him. Like, am I a bad person? Did I do this? To be or not to be? Like it did seem a little weird and performance driven, and to Borif's chagrin, the classic melodrama. But I do want to say I do love John Mahoney in this movie. He is fucking great in this movie.
He's consistently great in everything he's in.
When the walls are coming in on him, and he's hiding and kind of just huddled up in the bathroom, like, that spoke a lot about the character. That really, you didn't really need to get much more than that. That said everything you needed to know about where this guy's head is at.
He got Cusack involved in this, because I guess
did he really?
They'd worked on 8 Men Out. I just doing the thing I do. I
John
obsessively looked up some details. 8 Men Out, and then I guess him and John Cusack stayed pals. And then when the script was coming, Mahoney's like, yeah, there's a really good script coming. Keep your eye out for it. And then it came in, and that's essentially what led to him being in this movie, because it was supposed to be like Robert Downey Jr. and somebody else for the woman. Like the lady in this thing was going to be another huge actress at the time, but I can't remember who it is right now.
I heard that they were very close for John Mahoney's character to be Dick Van Dyke. I'm not sure how that would have played. But John Mahoney, we all know him as Marty from Frasier, because he only did that show for fucking forever for 10 years. But I'll love him best from Barton Fink playing the F. Scott Fitzgerald archetype.
He's great.
He's awesome in that. When you give a guy like a working actor like John Mahoney who can play a character and do character acting like he does, even like the Hudsucker Proxy, where he's just playing
for his screen credits, his home in many ways was the Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago. Like, he was a mainstay there. I remember I was living in Chicago when he died a couple of years ago, and among the theater community in Chicago, like, people I think it hit more heavily than it did with the general populace, because he, through the end of his life, would consistently come back to Chicago and perform on stage at the Steppenwolf. It's where he came up, and he was loyal to it for his whole life. He was a theater guy in many regards. And, it's similar to Alan Rickman has 3 or 4 movie credits that are those are his big movie credits. But mostly that was a theater guy who did movies sometimes. And I think John Mahoney was the same way.
Right. And then who could say no to a steady paycheck of a sitcom? That's it. And he was great in Frasier, we should say. I mean, he's one of the highlights of the show. But yeah, I was really struck with how, because he's kind of a short guy, right? Lloyd just kind of towers over him a lot of the time. So for him to kind of be this controlling parent, but also this sort of affable, there you go, son. He's very, like you said, kind of receptive to Lloyd. He's like, okay, he's not doesn't seem like a total burnout. He seems kind of lost and directionless. But, in a way, Lloyd doesn't look at it that way because his direction is dating his daughter.
Yeah. I think that Lloyd is also interesting because, like, when you think of him as a burnout, he doesn't seem that much like a burnout to me. Like, he's not constantly high. He's pretty responsible at that fucking party. He takes care of the keys. Yeah. Like, you don't drink until everybody goes home sober. And then at the end, he still doesn't drink because he has to drive somebody home to make sure they're safe. He's basically
the guy doesn't remember where he lives.
Yeah.
He's co-running like a children's class at the local boxing gym. Like, this guy, the fact that he doesn't know exactly what he wants to do at 18, he's also seems like a dude who, like, can figure shit out.
Yeah. I mean, this is weird because it's like he's a Gen X archetype that doesn't really exist in the same way now. Because it's like, at the time, a slacker hero was sort of like the underdog king. It was like, man, this guy's got it really figured out. He's not part of corporate America. He hasn't bought into the big machine, which was a huge conversation for Gen Xers that we don't really have anymore. Because I think it was like reaction potentially to like the 1950s. There's a whole lot of weird
The Graduate, yeah.
Yeah, like The Graduate. But like that whole time period got weird because if you watch like Pleasantville, a big part of that film, it works well now, but it was part of the contrast between the 90s versus the 50s in terms of what was considered important. A lot of fake niceness tends to be the thing that people pull out of the 50s is the thing they kept referencing in films like this. But this character changes through the era. Like, even like I have a feeling that this film has a spiritual sequel, and I'll put this out there and see how you guys feel about it.
Of course, it's Better Off Dead.
No, I was going to say
hamburger.
Gross Point Blank. Have you guys seen Gross Point Blank?
I have.
I have, but it's been a while.
It's essentially what would have happened if he didn't go with her to England. Like, the character has the exact same backstory where he's like, well, I was thinking about the military, went off to the military, they found out that I could kill people real good, and then it's like he comes back in like 50 years or like 10 years, and then they have a thing. It almost feels like a spiritual sequel to me, but that might just be me.
Well, I think Frasier's a spiritual sequel for Mr. Court because, then he gets out of jail, he serves as a beat cop in Seattle because it takes place in Seattle. He adopts, right, exactly.
Well, I mean, like if you look
and
at
he gets injured
films,
on the job.
They have the drunken party guy who comes by and he's threatening, and then he's suddenly sweet and warm, where you're like, okay, this guy's just drunk. You have the father who's adversarial, but accepts John Cusack's character when he comes back, assuming that he's done corporate work. And you even have like the girl who for some reason still sprung on this guy. Very strange. I don't know. There was a weird period of time where John Cusack was like the romantic icon for people. It was odd.
And this is part of why, but he was already kind of there with like Better Off Dead before that and showing up a little bit in Sweet 16, I guess, or 16 Candles or whatever. But when he really did play more of like a loser burnout kind of kid, he was more of a nerd in 16 Candles. But I don't know about Grosse Pointe Blank. I get where you're going with that. Mainly because, but I don't know where Dan Aykroyd hunting him comes into play.
I always forget that part's in the movie.
But I'll say a closer spiritual successor to say anything, in my opinion, is High Fidelity. Even though, I mean, it's based off a book, the Nick Hornby book, but I mean, it is a guy who woos women with music. He's not really a slacker burnout, but he's sort of just like stuck at a dead end record store kind of thing, and going through a breakup, and he reacts very much like Lloyd Dobler does. That's much more. And John Cusack's good at that archetype. That's why I don't know why I'm always charmed by that with John Cusack. Maybe because I relate to it because I was Lloyd Dobler. I was a kind of a C average kid. I was friendly with everybody, not really belonging to a specific group, but everybody knew me and liked me. Most of the people I hung out with were women. I relate to that. And then even in High Fidelity, I'm like, well, I'm a huge snob about my music too. So,
See, I think the spiritual successor to this film is a different John Cusack movie, and that's Identity, because I think all these characters existed in a little girl's head, in a man's head, and Eventually, they evolved into these.
I am going to effectively devalue the currency. I'm giving you my last point for the joke you just made. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm giving you the point because it's a good idea.
Yeah, but it is a good idea. Yeah. So, what do we think? Do we? Considering Cameron Crowe, I do want to talk a little bit because he is kind of a kind of well-known, prolific writer-director guy, but he's really only done a handful of movies. He hasn't really done a whole lot because I think he mainly
this was his first directorial effort. He wrote Fast Times, but he did not direct. This was the first one he directed. Down the line, I do want to talk about the use of the term "say anything" in the script, but I think talking about Cameron Crowe first is a valid idea.
Well, and I think with this movie you also kind of have to talk about James L. Brooks a little bit too, just because I think James L. Brooks kind of recognized and had a kindred spirit in the way they manufacture their drama and loved the script and said, well, I'll give you a shot to direct it because James L. Brooks can get away with anything at the time.
I mean, it's interesting.
Cameron Crowe,
when you look at it, he did have like an interesting arc. I mean, you can go ahead and get into the arc. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is an interesting arc. That's why I think what he's probably most famous for.
It's your classic Zemeckis arc.
Yeah.
Almost Famous is the movie that probably everybody remembers Cameron Crowe the most for besides this movie.
I think
and Jerry Maguire.
Okay, Jerry Maguire.
And in fact, it's really interesting. It's double interesting that Chris was like, Lloyd Dobler is Manic Pixie Dream Girl, because Elizabethtown is the movie that made Nathan Rabin coin the term Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Yep. I didn't know that, but that totally sounds right.
Yeah, he's got a type. Well, I mean, Penny Lane in Almost Famous is very much kind of like that. But do you think it's funny that this one also ends with like kind of does Cameron Crowe have a thing about flying or what? Because I mean, like the last scene in this movie, I immediately like, oh right, Almost Famous.
Well, I mean, that actually is a legitimate. That is a legitimate thing, though. I think he might have problems flying because, like, Almost Famous, of course, is known for being based off his time as a child working at Rolling Stones when he wasn't supposed to be there. So, like, the whole story with that kid is supposed to be autobiographical and it's super scary. But, like, when I was talking about, like, the progression of his career, it's interesting because he did Say Anything. It was, like, a huge kind of it was a big hit, but then, you know, he did Singles, which was super popular at the time. Like, no one now would want to watch it because it's like a romantic thing about Gen Xers, but not like a warmly remembered thing about Gen Xers. But then he did Jerry Maguire, became white hot, did Almost Famous. Everyone decided he was going to be the next big thing, and everyone thought that Kate Hudson was going to be the next big thing. And she's a huge star, but people thought she was going to be like
she
an
had
Olivia
a
de
run of
Havilland.
really bad rom-coms.
Yeah. And then he made Vanilla Sky, which left everyone confused as to why he remade a perfectly good Spanish film and called it Vanilla Sky. And it's just been kind of weird off things after
weird.
that.
We Bought a Zoo? That kind of stuff?
Right. It's you know what's weird about Vanilla Sky, considering my wife's taste, like, she loathes things like Twin Peaks and fucking weird shit like that. But that's the only movie she said, I watched that movie and it at least made sense. And I'm like, well, okay, you know.
You guys should watch the original.
We should explain it to me sometime.
You should watch the original. It's a Spanish movie.
I could be able to. Yeah,
if we ever,
Penelope Cruz is even in the original
to destroy our credit with a certain film, a certain degree of like the film bro Twitter community. Twin Peaks season 3, that shit's overrated, my friend.
Yes, sir.
So I think there's a limit. I think there is a zone where it works, and a zone where it doesn't. I haven't seen Vanilla Sky, so I can't judge that. And I think there's great Lynch, and then I think there's overindulgent Lynch.
I mean, Vanilla Sky is part of that same chunk of... Basically. Well, it's that same chunk of time where it was like, you know, you had things like Dark Sky and The Matrix come out, and there were a whole lot of those things where the protagonist's view of the world created the world around them or changed the world around them, and it was one of those films. Like, it was it wasn't an American film. It was Spanish.
Augmented reality.
Augmented reality. It had a twist in it. The original's awesome. It has the guy who is the main villain in The Devil's Backbone as the lead character. Incredibly handsome man. I don't mind telling anybody that.
And The Devil's Backbone is great.
Yeah,
I love that
movie.
Far better film than Vanilla Sky, in my opinion. The original film was far better.
No, I would count most of Cameron Crowe's filmography better than that movie.
Yeah.
I have not seen We Bought a Zoo, though, so who knows? But especially, I think with Say Anything, like considering how much of the script is so based off of just sort of melodramatic tropes.
Sure.
And you could tell
feels
this
like
is more
an
him
early film.
Yeah, right. He's kind of flexing his wings a little bit, trying to see how far he can go as a writer. And you could tell with something like Almost Famous, that's more a passion project for him, that he's thought about that story a long time.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Chris.
Have you guys had a similar experience to the kickboxing scene where you meet someone that you're dating's parents for the first time and you get set up for some embarrassment, and then it's an embarrassing, awkward moment? Have you guys had a few of those that you'd like to share? Anything that's funny?
Chris, I had to tell people that I was going to film school. What the fuck do you think the reaction was?
I had a similar experience. I had a girl that I dated in Indiana, and she was religious. I wasn't. I met her parents, and we had a conversation that involved me saying, I want to make horror and suspense films. And the mother said, I think those really hurt people spiritually. And I realized I had nothing I could add to either conversation in the room.
Yeah, I guess I feel like I haven't. I think I get the idea. I've felt personally like there's a phrase from, I can't remember what it originated from. Maybe it was Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but I'm not sure. The phrase, you give good parent, and it's like in comparison to like you give good head or something like that.
No, I followed the concept.
Yeah, I feel like I have historically given good parent.
You could put it as you make a good impression too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see,
That's
then
not
you
as
wouldn't
funny.
get the double
I wouldn't
entendre. See,
but you see, the
correct.
difference is, I would say that to parents. I wouldn't say this. I'll say with you, but with parents. Now, granted, after I'd been with Shannon for a while, she started listening to my other podcast, The Revisionists, and I don't know, like we talk about semen and shit on that, so who the fuck knows? She still talks to me, so.
well, I mean, truth be told, I mean, like I met Sarah when we were in high school, so I mean, like I'll probably relate to this movie probably a little bit more than I probably should.
And I didn't have a lot of
Sarah and I have
serious
been together
girlfriends prior to Shannon. I like incidentally went out with people I was interested in parents in high school and maybe once in college, but so I didn't have too many experiences with that.
Yeah. When I met Sarah's parents, it was like we hit it off immediately. Or me and her family, we hit it off immediately, and that's kind of the only time that's ever happened with someone I'm dating, and it was the first sign that I should probably get married to Sarah, and I did. Yeah. It was a good idea.
I did the same thing on the second date.
And also, I think that I'll say this about Russell in terms of Sarah's parents, or at least Jennifer. Like, the expectations there are atypical for most parents. I remember meeting Jennifer for the first time in high school, and it's like, let's smoke cigarettes and play Canasta.
That's right. Yep.
And she was like, I like Zach.
Yeah. No, and it was my first time meeting my wife's mom was very similar to that, like, because I had just turned 18, but I knew that parents were very, like, iffy about smoking and or whatever. And I'm looking around the table. Everybody was smoking at that time. And I kind of lean over to Sarah. Do you think they'll mind if I smoke a cigarette? And she looked around at the table like, yeah, they don't care. Like, do you think they give a shit? And I'd never had that before. So it was love at first sight. And yeah, I definitely would hold my boombox over my head if I had a boombox.
And I'll say this for old Jennifer Irby, who I feel like some of the Malofs watch or listen. I feel like I've heard that before. There's the thing about the family is they care about character more than aesthetics. So I'll give them that little
Well, obviously. So, speaking of, Zach, you wanted to mention the title of Say Anything.
Yeah,
I kind of took it as the fact that John Cusack is almost kind of a motor mouth, where he's just kind of going, he'll just say anything. That's kind of what I take up, but you're right. It mainly is only coming from.
I think that's maybe part of it.
Yeah,
I think
I expected it to be I expected it to have a crux on romantic thing. I think I had the same reaction you did, though, Zach.
Well, my response is, again, both times. I believe I only heard it twice, unless I missed one. Both times in a conversation between Ione Skye and John Mahoney. At the first time, it was very earnest, like, I can say anything to you between a father and daughter. And at the end, she realized he was holding back things from her, and he couldn't, she confronted him with his crimes, and he couldn't say anything to her about it. And I think it's about this transition for all young women, but really all young people, between this point where your parents are the people who you can go to for any emotional need, any problem, anything you have. And at a certain point that switches over for most people and it becomes a romantic partner. And even though she doesn't ever say it to John Cusack's character, I think he clearly becomes that for her by the end of the film. And so I think Say Anything is literally a reference to that sort of shift in the train tracks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because this is kind of more like this is a coming of age movie.
Yeah, she has a severe switch in it where it goes plainly from thinking that her dad's infallible to seeing her dad as a real person, which I agree is completely a thing that people go through at that age, because you realize, like, oh, like, I'm 18, I can do whatever I want now. My parents now have the same level of say in my life that I do. Oh, what am I going to do? And then you have to start judging your decisions versus their decisions, and you start understanding, like, oh, maybe that was an unhappy marriage and some other stuff. Yeah.
And even if you have a better relationship with your parents than Ione Skye does, like, I'll say this on the record. My parents have never been convicted of a felony. And in fact, I still, yeah, there were some close calls. But I'm still on good terms with my parents. I talk to them regularly, and I love them dearly. But I'm also an adult, and I've passed that point where, like, I talk to the person I'm in a relationship with a lot more than my parents, and that's a switch that happens for every young person. And I think in a soft way that is really what this movie's about. It's also why Diane is the main character and not Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I think that's...
Point. I also think that...
I mean, I fake gave you the point earlier. It's really for that. But I completely agree. Yeah, okay. Because, I mean, I really gave him the point, but I was screwing around. This is the actual point. It is interesting that they kind of go through that, and they kind of have to, like... I don't know. It's odd. It's an odd film. I kind of got stuck there for a minute because I was going to say something and then forgot what I was going to say all of a sudden.
Structurally, I think this film is weird, but I understand the point of it.
Sure. I mean, but it's also kind of indicative of that time too. I mean, especially like the shall we say wide variety of soundtrack choices. Because you've got like Fishbone and ska and shit and Soundgarden playing in the background.
And the score, I almost forgot to mention this. I'm glad you mentioned that. The score sounds like a fucking like early 80s sitcom score.
Yeah.
It's so fucking goofy. I don't know what that score was, but it is not serving this movie.
Right. I think the Gabriel song serves a little better.
Well, you can see the switch that happened culturally between this one and Singles, actually, which is strange because Singles is set, I believe, in Seattle during the grunge wave. And this is like set in like everyday America, but just like the time between 1986 and 1992, the cultural conversation had shifted so extremely that they went from like everyone looked and wanted to be like this cookie cutter kids that are doing well to like the slacker kids. And then it came over and became a bigger deal to be a slacker. But grunge and stuff like that really affected how the soundtracks worked. And Yeah, I completely agree. This one, there was a whole lot of MIDI, and I forgot how much it sounded like a soap opera at times.
Yeah, that was immediately my thought too. It sounded like, not even like current Days of Our Lives. I'm talking like the 1950s Days of Our Lives, where it's like an organ drop just.
And I'm talking about like the structure of this movie and the fact that I truly wonder. I don't know if Lloyd or Diane gets more screen time. I don't know, but. I think an interesting concept for a future theme, which I may or may not use, but I'm going to put it on the record right now, is movies where the protagonist and the person who is centrally featured are not necessarily the same.
That would be
because
cool.
I think that's an interesting topic, and there are a few movies that are like that.
Get ready for Citizen Kane, Borif.
Oh God, no. That one, I'm saying bullshit. No, right now, no Citizen Kane. Never watching that fucking movie again. Greatest movie ever made. Fuck
we
that
have
movie.
discussed veto. When we started this podcast, we discussed a veto power, but we never explored it further. But right now, you're in mercy. Right now, you're in the trap, Chris. You're in the trap.
That's right.
If somebody picks Citizen Kane,
That's
you're
right.
in the trap.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Citizen Kane, let me ask you guys, since this movie is so ubiquitous, overrated?
A little.
Yeah. It gets referenced.
I didn't love it. It was fine.
It gets referenced so much as like a classic romance, but when you really look at it, it's a pretty basic romance with pretty down-to-earth stuff, and it's fine to watch it, but it's not something that I would like remember and call to as a cultural touchstone for any relationship outside of watching it.
And so much of the movie is like nominally about developing this relationship, but like, I don't know, man. Like, it just feels, sometimes it just feels like wasted time, or like, I don't know what the point of this scene is at times. And I honestly wonder, like, in regards to what I just mentioned, like, I wonder if it would have been better if like, the Mahoney stuff was slightly more central and Lloyd had a smaller role, because it does seem like it's a breakdown. I don't know. I mean, I guess both those are important for the, mainly the problem is, honestly, I guess Diane's in both those, but like, she doesn't always feel like the central character, and she should very strongly feel like the central character. She just doesn't enough. I think people think Lloyd is the central character of this movie. He's fucking not. That dude doesn't change.
Well, yeah, he doesn't, because even at the pivotal moment when she comes in for help, he kind of pushes back a little bit, but then he immediately realizes, you know what, I don't really care. Like I'll be happy.
And he's not like suddenly. He's also not making good decisions all of a sudden. Like, he goes with her to England, and they haven't had any conversations about green cards, where he's going to live, how he's going to live there for a year with her.
They probably cut all that shit out because it'd be a boring thing to watch.
It's boring detail stuff. But the thing is it's still like you would want some sort of an idea that they're going to land somewhere and do a thing.
Where the fuck is the Dobler cut where they show him getting a green card? This should be a 4-hour movie where they
in 4:3 aspect ratio.
John Mahoney. Where's his trial? Okay, we need a John Mahoney trial. We need about an hour of that. We need an hour of him figuring out his immigration.
And we need to at least introduce the lawyer, who's going to have a lengthy dialogue scene and conversation. Also happens to be played by Alec Baldwin, banging two little balls together. Yeah.
I do actually love the scene where they figure out what's going to happen to John Mahoney, where like instead of having a trial, it's just two lawyers in a back room being like, "How about this? How about this?
To go to lunch?
Okay, that sounds good to me." And that's it.
Where are you eating? Yeah, right.
I mean, I prefer that to seeing courtroom scenes. Courtroom scenes are boring. I mean, that was like I would say that is one of the best scenes of just efficiency in the movie, whereas everything else just takes too long. Like the opening sequence in the movie Up is like ultimate efficiency to get me to the point where I really care about that relationship by the time things go bad.
That depends. There's some great courtroom scenes, but I say this as somebody who last week watched the scene in The Wire where Omar takes the stand and Maurice Levy talks about him, like cross-examines him. That scene, fucking great. But yeah, many courtroom scenes are.
And it's but I also like this movie did this a couple because we talked about it a little bit, because we didn't know Lloyd's place academically. We know he graduated. We know that Diane is a valedictorian. But then, like, the guy, can we talk about how the guidance counselor just shows up at this random party to go piss in fucking Lloyd's ear about what he's going to do for the rest of his life? I've never known a guidance counselor to care that much, if at all.
Not unless they're like a predator. I don't know why they'd be at a party where kids are drinking.
Not great. Yeah, not great to go to a high school party and just be like, all these drunk ass high school kids.
And then you'd be like, what are you doing with your life, Lloyd?
Including a party that includes some weird cameos. Eric Stoltz is in, I think, only the party scenes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he also was a production assistant on this whole film. That's the thing.
Really?
No one. Yeah, he was in like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and wanted to get more time behind camera because he wanted to become more of a filmmaker. And he did exactly that. He was on set. He's credited as a production assistant.
Holy shit.
Did a ton of shit. I guess he also, it like came back to pay him back later because he wound up doing like additional parts in later Cameron Crowe movies. But Eric Stoltz, like one of my, when I was a child, he's like one of my favorite teen actors for some reason. I think it was like The Fly 2. Anyway, what happens is that he went off and has become very successful as a go-to director for TV shows. He did a whole bunch of seasons of I can't remember what show it is right now, but it's a big one. I can look it up later.
Another notable cameo at that party. The young woman who was Diane's sort of academic foil, the woman who like she fought with becoming valedictorian for, and they're like, oh, you pushed me harder, I pushed you harder. And then she's like, what's the matter with Lloyd? That woman is Heather Chandler in Heathers. I don't know her from anything else, but I think Heathers is a better movie for reference.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
and
it's weird.
China Phillips. China Phillips is in there too.
Yeah.
China Phillips
a very young
Uh,
Jeremy and a very young Jeremy Piven, because him and Cusack are boys from Chicago. They've known each other for years.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we could probably go on to final thoughts and see what we're doing next week.
Venture Spleen.
Oh my God. All right. Well, I mean, it's a date movie. I mean, it's a high school date movie for this particular age group. I mean, one of the critics in the New York Times fucking hated this movie because they didn't believe that any of the characters were kind of like this, as it wasn't relatable to high school kids. I'm not sure about that because I related to this movie a lot more in high school than I do today. So it's that. It's cute, like the chemistry between Ione Skye and John Cusack and John Mahoney is really good. Like their own kind of nervousness and apprehension towards getting into a relationship that you want to get into, I felt was very young and inexperienced and believable for the characters, and they played it off very well. I think if you haven't seen Say Anything, I would be shocked, but if you haven't, it's worth seeing. I mean, it's definitely worth seeing, even if some of the elements in there are very dated. As Zach pointed out, as far as the time and place it existed, not as bad. It could get a lot worse. But the timeless tropes that it tends to crib off of in the overall movie drown out that kind of, and it's what makes the movie more timeless and not just dated 1989, silly rom-com movie. So yeah, I mean, like, it still carries the day, I suppose. So it was fine.
I'll just go next to continue off one of Russell's last thoughts. Refreshing thing from a movie from 1989. I didn't hear any like slurs. I didn't hear any R words, F words. As far as I remember, I missed something or forgot something.
A brief moment when there was a little ebonics that popped out of our boy John Cusack talking to the kid at the start. That was the only cringy moment.
Well, and I think even that they're making fun of a commercial that was on all the time.
Yeah.
That I have no reference to.
I don't know. Maybe.
But yeah, I didn't sense any like extreme homophobia or like making fun of the mentally challenged or anything like that, which almost every movie you watch from these days, it's like, you just got to accept it as a given, almost. And even the sexism was like very reined in. Like John Cusack, he's friends with women. Seems like a guy who respects women's opinions. Like, and the guys were presented as idiot douchebags, whereas they're usually presented as like, you know, the protagonist,
plucky heroes or underdogs or whatever. Yeah.
So that's something going for it. That said, this is a movie that simultaneously I was watching it and sometime I was like, I don't know why they're wasting time with this. And also, when it was almost over, I'm like, holy shit, this is almost over. This movie went by so fast. So I don't know how it wastes time and feels like it's doing, like, zooming by it almost simultaneously, but it pulls it off. It's fine. If you have an evening and you want to watch a movie, it's fine. Hey, you can watch Say Anything. It's not going to be you're not going to feel bad the next day. You're not going to remember it for your life unless you were.
If you've just gone through a breakup, if you've just gone through like a pretty severe breakup, don't watch this movie. Just don't. Yeah. It'll just.
No, I mean, any John Cusack movie kind of does that to you. Like, I would say that like High Fidelity is also a big. Don't watch that. If you've just gone through a breakup, don't watch that. Don't watch any John Cusack movies that involve romance because they're all intense on the breakups.
Right. Well, and they all magically get back together too, as you would expect in real life. So
after chasing the lady.
I think it's Cameron Crowe gearing up for his sort of fairly short period of prominence, and I think a few better movies. In fact, I should say, I didn't even think about it. Jerry Maguire could have been on my ubiquitous movies watch list. I had never seen that shit. But I think this image is a little more famous than Show Me the Money.
Yeah.
Sure. And I also didn't consider that at the time.
It's okay. Let me see. I would say this one is right up there with the other Cameron Crowe movies. Like, he's best when his movies are kind of non-offensive and about kind of like fairly common emotional issues that everyone can kind of understand about coming of age. The stuff he does that gets further from that, like Vanilla Sky, Aloha, We Bought a Zoo, that stuff tends to all stray from that. Like, it's small stories about a character's coming of age and the emotions they have to deal with and getting over parents and sort of what it means to define yourself as a person outside of when your parents are telling you what to do and who to be. It's fine. I agree with Zach. It's a fine movie. It's not going to offend anyone. It's not really going to surprise anyone. John Mahoney's great. John Cusack is entertaining. I would say this is probably one of Ione Skye's biggest films outside of like Gas, Food, Lodging, which was a big indie film from the 90s that everyone like called. I
feel comfortable saying this is a bigger film than Gas, Food, Lodging.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my feelings too. It's just okay. If you guys want, we can rip the Band-Aid off about the next thing coming if you want to.
I would love to hear it, but before we do, let's run down the points total that we've gained, because again, we are pretty generous with our points this time, boys. Alrighty, so Chris Boroff, you have gained a point from Zach for the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. So you now have 13 points. I didn't get a goddamn thing, so I'm stuck at 11 points. Zach Powers, the points monster, as always, has 15 points now. From me for defending Lloyd and one from Bora for questioning the title of the movie, with you having the lone remaining bonus point to give out. Alrighty, so with our last ubiquitous movies that everybody's seen, that with Bora, if we already know if you've listened to the show, it's quite a library.
Pick. Will it be the chalk pick?
Right. So Chris Boroff, what do we got?
So here's the thing. You guys said ubiquitous film. And that could literally be anything. So I was so tempted in my specific...
No, it could not. For instance, Gas, Food, Lodging is not a ubiquitous film.
Hey. What I'm saying is, is that there's a ubiquitous film that I hadn't seen that I was more than willing to push on you guys, and it was Justice League, because that shit is everywhere and everyone's talking about it. I haven't really paid that much attention to it yet. Everyone's talking about Justice League.
That's a stretch. That's a stretch of the rules that actually makes sense. I have to concede, but I know I'm going to let you continue.
Yes, because that would have happened.
That's not your pick necessarily.
That's not my pick, because here's the deal. I haven't been able to pick a movie in a while, so I'm willing to take one for the team so that I can potentially get a chance of doing something. And there are also two films that you guys have brought up so much that I haven't seen, and it was really a toss-up for me, because I would love to sit down and watch Black Christmas, because it's something that I think I would deeply enjoy, but it seems like there's going to be another time for it. So in this case, I'm going to go with the chalk pick of It's a Wonderful Life, because I literally have no expectations. I've only heard...
I can't deny it.
I mean, I've heard from my family, my parents who had to sit through it when they were children, that they hate it. And a lot of people who had to watch it hate it. But I've heard it in the same way that like people who have to watch Christmas Carol or A Christmas Story all the time hate it. But it's not a bad movie. It's a good movie. It's just that people watched it too much.
Forget about Christmas Story.
Okay.
Forget Christmas Story.
No. Okay.
This is, I have to admit, as much as it's a layup, it's the right choice, because I don't think anything you could have picked is as eternally ubiquitous as this. Even if you had picked Zack Snyder's Justice League, which, by the way, we should reference. We're recording this in like early April of 2020. By the time you hear this, you won't give a fuck about Zack Snyder's Justice League. It will have been 1.5 months ago.
One would hope.
No one's going to be talking about that shit. They'll never talk about it again for the rest of time, because it doesn't fucking matter. It's a 4-hour long thing, slog. No one's going to watch. It's fine. Whatever. Who cares about a fine movie that's 4 hours long? Like, but no.
I am curious to compare it to the original cut, because I've heard that the original cut is awful.
Did you see Batman versus Superman? Because that didn't inspire a lot. That shouldn't inspire any confidence whatsoever.
I didn't either.
This is like so many things have done a riff of this. This is like if I hadn't seen Rashomon, I would have to pick Rashomon, because it's eternally referenced.
Fucking great movie.
True.
I have seen Rashomon. So I didn't pick that.
I mean, I haven't seen it, like I said, so I guess I'll be finding a lot of these references as we go into it, but I might make you tell me what some of the references you've seen to this have been, because
some of them you'll just know.
Oh my god.
I mean, the only times I've ever heard of this has been when
premise.
It's in other films. I kind of do. Like he tries to commit suicide, and then it turns into like a Christmas spaz.
This. Nope. My lips are sealed, sir. You're on your own for this one.
Someone who is truly like, this is like someone who doesn't know the twist in Psycho almost.
I mean, I don't know. I've only heard it referenced in other films, so it's one of those things that I have a feeling I'm going to have the same moment that I did with like Citizen Kane, where I didn't see the movie, but everybody talked about a sled. So I knew about a sled in context, only that it had to do with that movie. And in this case, I believe
you'll have almost the opposite reaction.
Okay.
And I'm putting that on paper.
I can't wait.
Okay.
It is the opposite of Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that sounds great, because fuck Citizen Kane.
I know. It's our favorite hobby horse, buddy. Or if I'm proud of you for picking this pick, for going for the chalk pick.
No, I think it's the right choice. You know what, Chris?
Yes.
I said in our chat, and this is a behind the scenes glimpse, I was like, Chris could go with this chalk pick. I don't know if he should. It's the wrong time of year to watch it for the first time, but it's the right pick for this category. It's the right pick.
I'm down. I'm down.
I'm not going to lie. I did sort of pick this theme as a layup to you, just because I wanted to see which movie out of all the movies you mentioned.
I had a feeling because, I picked out notoriously strange picks before this, so it was kind of, are you going to push us off the cliff one more time? Are you going to do it to us?
I'll say straight up, audience, hate to say it, unless Chris fucking despises this, we got a winner.
I'm going to vote against my own pick. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
You cannot tell. I think that if
You have to vote honestly.
Bora.
Oh, you don't want to say that because I'll be held accountable.
I don't know how he's going to react to this movie because there's such a gear shift in this movie that is anyway. We'll have plenty of time to get into that. Tune us in for the next time for when we watch Christmas in Spring with It's a Wonderful Life, the classic Jimmy Stewart movie. It's shocking that Borf hasn't seen this movie and he went through film school and everything. So join us next time for It's a Wonderful Life. And like, subscribe, and share with your friends about the movie Trap. So, for my co-hosts, I have been Russell Carlson. I have been joined by Chris Bruff.
Hello. Goodbye.
You say goodbye. All right. And for Zach Powers.
I used to be able to say anything to Russell. Now I can say anything to Chris. That's how life goes.
And thank you very much for listening. And as always, as we say here on the Movie Trap, Diane Ladd is too young to be Chevy Chase's mom.
What are your plans for the future?
Spend as much time possible with Diane before she leaves.
Seriously, Lloyd.
I'm totally and completely serious.
No, really?
You mean like career? I don't know. I thought about this quite a bit, sis. And I have to say, considering what's waiting out there for me. I don't want to sell anything, buy anything, or process anything as a career. I don't want to sell anything, bought or processed, or buy anything sold or processed, or process anything sold, bought, or processed, or repair anything sold, bought, or processed. You know, as a career, I don't want to do that. So, my father's in the Army. He wants me to join, but can't work there for great. So what I've been doing lately is kickboxing. Which is a new sport. Got a good future. As far as career longevity, I don't really know because you don't have talent. Straight and six is a fighter, you know. It's no good. So you have to be great. I can't really tell if it's great until I go to company pro fights. I haven't been knocked down yet. I don't know, I can't figure it out tonight, so.